Well, again, staffing folks, wanted to take this video and talk you through the job description that I want you to create for me in your partner groups. I will share to my screen here so that you can follow along here. I believe this is in the content section so that you will be able to look at this as you go. You might print it. What I'd like you to do is to download this file and use it as the template, and then go in and highlight a section and type right over the top of it so that we have the same formatting, the bullets line up on the side, the font is the same, the type and the style is the same. First thing I want you to look at is up at the top here, and as I mentioned in the overview here, this may look very, very different from the job descriptions that you have in your organization, and that's okay. I want you to use this one even though it looks different, because there's a purpose for this particular format. It gets you to think about some things that you probably don't cover in your normal job descriptions that I want you thinking about. Up at the top in italics, you're going to have the job title of the job that you have selected from our list. Typically, we want to have an ongoing version of this thing that tells us the date that you might have in the real world, date created. I don't put that on here, but the date that we last reviewed this thing and the date that we last updated it. In a good, perfect world, we're going to look at our job descriptions every year or two, maybe every 3 years, just to make sure nothing's changed. So once we review the thing, we're going to update this date to be a current date here. So I go in here right away, change the title if that's not the job I'm working on, and the date last reviewed would be August the 29th or whatever it is date that you looked over it. You might say it's still good the way it is, so you've reviewed it. And then if you decide to make changes to it, go in here and put the date that you made the changes. So if I look at it on the August the 30th and decide to make changes, I'll update both the date reviewed and the date updated. Otherwise, I'm just going to update the date reviewed. In the job summary, I suggest a lot of times that people do that last, after they've done the essential functions, because the job summary ought to take what's in the essential functions section below and group it into 2 or 3 main things. And we don't want this to read like a help wanted ad, looking for a receptionist who's very outgoing, whatever. The job summary really is supposed to just give the reader a quick, high-level overview of what they're going to do in this job. It's kind of like the abstract or the executive summary on a paper. You read that paragraph to get a general idea of what's in the rest of the paper to know if you want to read the rest of the paper. So you might have to create the essential functions and then go back and clump them into groups. In the receptionist thing, we might say, as far as the essential functions go, you're going to answer the phone, perhaps you're going to greet people as they come in the door, and you may come up with 7 or 8 different things that they do. Once you've got those functions, you can go back and look at them and say, okay, if we can take these 8 functions and group them into the general categories of interacting with guests and coordinating the aesthetics of the front office and this thing. So there's 3 basic things, and within interacting with guests, now there's 3 or 4 functions. Within maintaining the aesthetics of the waiting room, there's 3 or 4 things we're going to do. Periodically dust the furniture and make sure that the chairs are all put back in the right place at the end of the day, and so forth. So when we read the job summary, we're going to understand that we're going to interact with customers, we're going to maintain the lobby area, and we're going to do this other thing. So you see here, I've put it, this section, you'll want 1 or 2 good sentences that describe the big picture kinds of things. The receptionist will be responsible for, and then keep it parallel, interacting with customers, comma, maintaining the cleanliness of the waiting area, comma, and something that ends in ing, a verb that ends in ing, doing this. Then you'll go to essential functions, and I like this statement here. It addresses a couple of things. Number one, it introduces that we're going to have the main things that you do, but it also tells us about reasonable accommodations and that we will make those reasonable accommodations to people who have disabilities to help them do the jobs. It's important as an EEOC, as OSHA has all those things that we make every effort that's reasonable to help people do the job if they're qualified for the job. So you make sure that you have this particular statement. Probably don't put this space bar here just because it saves a little space, but then have the bullets here. What will I be doing in this job? You got to have these lines ahead, as it says here. Start everything with a verb like, you will be expected to interact, to copy, to clean, to organize, to smile, whatever this kind of stuff is. Keep in mind that essential functions come in two categories. Number one are things that you do all the time that aren't that big a deal. And number two is things that you rarely do, but they are a big deal. And there's going to be a combination of both of those things. And then I want you to have the last bullet exactly like it shows here in the template. You will be expected to perform additional responsibilities and duties within the scope of employment as directed or assigned, not otherwise prohibited by law or regulation. I want that word for word. Then that's the job content section. Then we move into something that is not usually on job descriptions, but I like it, again, because it makes you think about how people interact with each other. So we call it the job context section. And there are A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H sections, all of which I want you to address. Under supervision received, who do I report to? And you might say the receptionist position reports to the unit manager, or reports to the vice president of operations, the title of a person who's located on the second floor of the administration wing, or who is located in the managerial area of the warehouse. General title of the person and general location. You'll also want to say, and who can be reached by phone or email if they're not in the office. So if the question is asked, who do I report to? Here's the title of the person, here's where they located, here's how you can reach them. Under available guidelines, you get to do a little creative thinking here. If I have a question and my supervisor's not available, where do I go? You might have a statement that says something like, in the event of questions, this position can learn answers from other people who do similar jobs through the company handbook, through the policies and procedures manual for this position, and list all the different things, the company intranet, whatever 3 or 4 or 5 different resources this person can go to get an answer. For the receptionist, there's a manual for the telephone system. That's a resource. That's an available guideline. So you want to have a good paragraph here that is maybe 1 or 2 sentences that lists the different things that they can access or people that they can go to get guidelines on how to do their job. Accountability and consequence of error. Why I want this in your job description, even though it's not in the normal job description, is that I want you to think about the impact that this position has on the overall well-being of the company. What are you being held accountable for? It ought to go back to the section up top here with the job summary. So you're going to say this position will be held accountable for interacting with customers, for keeping the lobby area clean, and for doing this other thing. In the event it's not done well, consequences could include bad word-of-mouth publicity, accidents in the reception area. What are the things that could go wrong if you don't do your job well? And you might also not only indicate the kinds of things that could happen, but what the consequences are for that, which could result in disciplinary actions, termination. It could include lawsuits against the company if somebody falls and gets hurt. So what are we holding you accountable for, and what could happen if you don't do it? What are the consequences of the error? Section D is personal contacts. I want you to brainstorm, for the example of the receptionist, who might they come in contact with? They'll come in contact with visitors as they come in the building on a daily basis. They'll come in contact with employees as they report to work on a daily basis. Maybe they'll come in contact with folks on the phone daily. They might interact with the executives in order to give messages as necessary, or they might have to attend a meeting that's weekly. But who do they come in contact with? All right. You probably start off with saying something like, contacts will be internal and external. Certainly with a receptionist, it's going to be both. There are some jobs that don't have any external contacts. There may be some jobs that don't really have any internal contacts. Contacts will be internal and external, and you'll say as follows perhaps. And then you'll start with a category of people, visitors, on a daily basis to welcome them to the organization, or the CEO on a weekly basis to provide an update on such and such. Maybe 4 or 5 different groups, each one starting with a category of people, talking about the frequency that you interact with them and the basic nature of the interaction. Try to make sure that it either all goes on page 1 or you put spaces in here to push it on page 2. Right now you see where I've got it starting on page 1 and ending on page 2, and that's not real clean and crisp looking. So when you've done the whole thing, go back and make sure that everything ends on a page so that you don't carry an item, an idea over to the next page. In the interim here, I want you to look at the footer on this particular job description. I've got the name of our company here. You're going to replace receptionist with the title of your job, and it's programmed to count the number of pages. All right, so moving back into the job description itself. Now, part E is supervision received. Most entry-level jobs don't supervise other people, but you might. If you're being hired for the manager of something, you might say, this position is expected to supervise as many as 5 other interns or lower level employees, or it might say this position typically doesn't supervise anyone else. All right, physical demand. What kind of strain will I have? So here you might say, this particular position is going to be expected to stare at the computer for long periods of time, or we'll have lots of walking involved, or maybe we'll have to lift up to 30 pounds and carry that load for, across the office 30 feet. Might have to be outside in the weather, those kinds of things. But what are the physical demands? Part G is similar to that, but work hazards. So you might address things like you have to work a forklift, or you could have some injury. You might have to work with chemicals that could burn you. You might have to work a trash compactor. Anything that could create physical harm. Physical demands are what things are going to kind of wear you down by the end of the day. Demands or work hazards are things that could injure you in the course of your daily, could create, we might say, a workers' comp claim perhaps. Personal demands is the last section here. What about this job could interfere with your life? All right, so do you have to travel at all? You want to specify it's daytime travel, it's by car, it's by plane, it's overnight. Do you have to come in on holidays or weekends or work evenings? What about overtime? Again, the idea is, how will this job impact your ability to interact with your family, your friends, whatever? All right, so that is the job context, something for each one of those sections that fits to the job that you're doing. And then finally, the person specification. Think of the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. So it's a quick listing, bullet function, bullets line up with the left margin. And the things, the ability to read a spreadsheet, list what skills, answering the phone, knowledge of accounting procedures if you're an accounting clerk or something like that, ability to lift certain amounts of weight, things like that. And you probably want to have 7 or 8 bullets of knowledge that you need, skills that you've got to have, or the ability to do certain things. All right, and then we move to minimum qualifications for education and experience, especially what is preferred and what is required. Keep in mind that you've got college sophomores. Some of them are 20 years old. Some of them are 40 years old. So make sure that all of these people can qualify. So perhaps 2 years of college level education in a marketing field is preferred. High school diploma or GED equivalent is required. Some for the education, and for experience, we might want to say 5 years of work experience in this field is required. But again, some 20-year-olds won't have that. So try to make sure that you've got some preferred things that give people bonus points in the interview process. But the required things are something that most anybody taking business communications would be able to meet. Licenses or certificates. If you've got to have a driver's license because you're going to be driving a company car, state that here. If you've got to be able to drive a forklift, if you've got to be CPR certified, in a lot of cases you're going to say nothing special is required. All right, and then toward the end here, I want you to put these 2 paragraphs word for word as is given you here. All right, must be authorized to work in the United States, no security clearance needed, or if you're going to be a security guard, maybe there is a security clearance needed. Specify that here. Candidate will need to be able to pass a drug test and a criminal background check. Prior convictions could be considered if the candidate can show that they're not relevant to the performance in this role. So whether that thing was 12 years ago and we don't consider it, or whether it was 4 years ago and you're afraid that telling me that you have a conviction of, possession of marijuana or whatever, we want a statement that says we're not going to immediately rule you out just because of that. We'll try to decide based on the circumstances if that's going to prevent you from doing your job. And then finally, we're an equal opportunity and affirmative action employer committed to doing all these things. These 2 paragraphs as is. I'd like it for you to try to work this job description as it states here to fit on 2 pages. After you've come up here and you've moved this down onto page 2. So maybe you have to cut some words. If it's only a page and a half, there may be room to add some detail somewhere, but try to get it to where it's 2 pages. You'll see that my template is actually 3 pages, and some of that is because I've got a lot of extra wording in some of these sections that you won't need. Hopefully that helps you understand what I'm looking for in the job description. Again, it may look completely different from the job description that you've been using at your company for the last 6 decades. I don't care. I want you to think through this process so that you, at least in the course of this class, think about these kinds of things that your candidates are going to want to know. Whether you do this in the real world or not, it is situational. You probably won't do part B here with the job context. But again, as I said at the beginning of the video, if you've thought through the context, you're going to be able to answer questions that that candidate is going to have in the interview. Hope that makes sense. We'll go back to camera here and we'll round out our video. Use this template and use this video to help you and your partner work through the job description. I would like it if a lot of it came off the top of your head. What makes sense as far as this job goes? Now, there's certainly lots of online resources like ONET. You might have the ability to go to your HR department and say, hey, can you give me a copy of the job description for the warehouse clerk for a project at school? But I don't want you to use solely that. I want you to use your creativity, use logic from your standpoint to define what this job looks like in a way that a candidate could know, number one, can I even apply for this? Do I want to apply for this? And that sort of thing. So if you have questions, ask Dr. Grimes. Discussion board is a great place to start. Otherwise, get to working on your job description with your partner, and I'm looking forward to see what it looks like. That's it for now.